Hello, everyone. This is YLAM again, doing another quick episode of episode 2 of DRL. So, this is the Miami Knights finals. So, we get to find out who won level 1 of the DRL championships for 2017, which was a really good episode. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to watch. I thought the racing was good. I thought all of the extra material that they put in between was very good. So before we actually start talking about the contents of this episode, just wanted to quickly tell you that this is off the cuff. It's unedited. It's my quick thoughts after just watching it. So if you haven't watched it, definitely go watch it first. But again, take it with a grain of salt of anything I would say. It's just a fan giving his opinions. So that's all it is. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the stuff that went on in episode 2. I'm going to go ahead and start off talking about the pilots like I did last time. So we know who our final 6 is, and I'm just going to talk about each pilot and what I know about them and what are my opinions of them based on what I have talked to them about or what I don't know about. So the first pilot is actually a pilot that I didn't know about, which is 32-bit guilds, which is a really strange pilot handle, but there's plenty of strange ones. Definitely a young person, and but he's got the skills, he's got the confidence. I really like the demeanor that he portrays when he's racing, and when he's actually doing his interviews. Confidence is such a big thing when it comes to sports. And I think he has it, which is why he's the first rookie that we've seen that made it into the finals. So kudos to him, being the only rookie to make it into the finals on the first, the first level of DRL. It's definitely cool watching him. The spotlight was really cool. I'm glad that they actually highlighted him because he's the rookie that made it in. But to be honest with you, I always find these spotlights to be a little strange because they're really centered around like family life for these guys, but like you're trying to build these guys up as pro pilots, but you're talking about like family life and girlfriends. So I don't know if that conveys the right I don't know, the right view. I'm not sure what the word is there, but it's like if you want to portray them as pro pilots, shouldn't you have content about them working towards becoming a pro pilot? That's just me. I still enjoy the highlight. It's just I found it to be strange in which they're trying to build up these pilots, but there's really not a whole lot of content about the pilots becoming pro pilots. That's all I'm saying. But it's really cool to see him. I'm definitely going to have to reach out to him, see if I can actually learn more about him, try to get him on the podcast, to be honest with you. Seems like a very cool guy. Definitely want to know more about him. Next person I would talk about is Okbots. So I've talked to him quite a lot. He's actually around this area. He's one of those calm, collected people. You can really tell just from the outset that racing is important to him, and this hobby is super important to him, and being in DRL is very important to him. But he's one of those pilots where I feel getting him a lot of practice helps. Same thing with Beast Mode. He's already out for level 1, but they're the two pilots in which I always think that, they're always going to get better when they have more flying time. I assume they actually had a whole lot of flying time, but he just didn't do so well so far. But just based on what I've seen him fly, I know he can keep up with any of the pilots that are racing right now in the top 6. So, hopefully he'll do better in another level. But I always enjoy talking to Okbots. He's a very level-headed guy. And he's always very sincere and very nice. So hopefully he does better. The next two that I talk about is Wild Willie and A-Nub. And to me, these two they're the wild card pilots. They're the pilots that you just never know what you get out of them. Like literally, they could be crashed out immediately, or they could set record lap times. It's one of those things where if you give them an inch, they could just take the whole thing and just dominate. And they're the type of pilots that if you push them to a wall, they know when to take their risk and they know how to get back into a race. There's very few pilots that once they fall behind, they can get themselves back into a race. A-Nub and Wild Willie, I've seen enough of their flying to know that you can never count them out. They can start last, but they can still finish first because they just have that aggressive flying, but they also know when to take the risk and when to be aggressive. They're just the type of pilots that you just don't know, so you always watch them because they can always finish. But they're also the type of pilots that will crash out immediately because they overtake on certain risk, or they just, they misjudge one thing. And, in this sport, you misjudge one thing, you wreck into a concrete pillar. That's it. You're not going to get back up from that one. Jet's another strange case. Like, again, another person that I've talked to and I know a little bit about. And he's the type of person that is just as skilled as Wild Willie and Anub. But he's the type of person where I feel like he needs to be challenged to bring out the absolute best of him. He's kind of like the pilot that likes to have his back to a wall and then he'll show you his best. Although I think if I were to say, I think Jet takes more risks than Wild Willie. Well, no, not Wild Willie. Wild Willie takes some pretty amazing risks, but usually he comes out ahead on most of the risks he takes. But like between Anub and Jet, I think Jet takes more risks. But then that's the reason why he's the champion, because like at the end of the day, you need to take risks if you want to be the champion, because you're going to have to work out that, it's not even a second. It's like half a second, a tenth of a second. Those are the things that you measure by, when you want to be the champions in DRL. So really interesting guy in terms of like the dynamics of when he is at his best, because he will just show you some amazing things when you think he's out for the count. In this episode, he was out of the races for, being first, but he still showed his best racing when he was already out. So it's very, he's an interesting guy. Last person to talk about is probably Gab. Gab is Mr. Consistent. He has been unshakable in episode 1, but we'll talk about some of the racing here shortly. That doesn't mean that he is perfect, though. I mean, there were certain things that as the episode 2 progresses, that he showed you that, he isn't going to be the top pilot throughout the entire series. He does have some things that he can improve upon. And there are certain pilots that towards the end, they took advantage of what they can do better to try to get or to try to make this a very competitive episode. So it was really fun to watch all of them just, fly. It was really great watching the top 3, the top 4. They were competitive throughout the whole episode. It was a lot of fun. If you're a drone racer, I think you would really enjoy this episode. It's definitely worth watching. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the racing, or actually a lot of bit about the racing, because that's this whole episode. It was just all about the racing, which is fine by me. I enjoy racing. I enjoy watching racing. A couple of interesting things to note. At the beginning, they highlighted the fact that Gab crashed out on both his practice rounds at the beginning. So it kind of, added a little suspense to it, but didn't really add too much expense. If you watch Gab for a while now, you know that he's always Mr. Consistent, and he has just that collected demeanor about him. But it's interesting to see, what they tell you tidbits about at the beginning and how it plays out for the rest of it. And this particular tidbit didn't really play much out in the beginning at all, or for the rest of the episode, actually. But going into the first heat of the episode, Anub and Jet, they're the talkative ones, okay? And then Wild Willie in the middle, they'll trash talk. And I think that's their way of cutting down the stress, and also to psych out the rest of the pilots, because the rest of the pilots were super quiet. Gab, I don't think that affects him too much. He's always chill. But 32 Bits and Okbots in the back, they probably actually helped them to be away from the trash talking, to be honest with you. But once the heat got started, it was a tough time for Anub and Jet because they crashed out. But Gab, being his consistent self, you can tell that having a fast start is exactly what he needs to dominate. And that's pretty much what we saw in the first 3 heats, in which he was dominating this episode because he was getting out to those fast starts. One of the interesting things that they did is they have a staggered starting line. So the person who qualified the highest, he gets to start out ahead of everybody else. So he gets maybe 5 extra feet, but at the beginning, if you're really on the sticks real fast, that 5 feet still gets you out into a lead. And, once you're in the lead, you're the only person with a clean line. So, for Gab, that's what he needed to stay in front and to really pull out to an aggressive lead at the beginning. And that's really what played out to his strategy, and what really helped him the most in this particular level, or level 1 Miami Nights. whatever you want to call it, was that he was able to break out first, get his line. He does a really, really good job in open space. I think he finds really clean lines when he's not being pushed in open space, because he'll find those lines and he'll fly fast, and he just gets out to these huge leads, which is really hard for the rest of the pack to catch up to, because everybody else is fighting other pilots for their lines. So like he really dominated those, those early heats and that's kudos to him for doing that. And also in between each heat, Gab is so quiet. It's just one of those things where he just kind of vibrates, or maybe not vibrate, but he emanates like confidence, and it gets to you. I think for some of the pilots, it gets to them. 32 bits, it actually did pretty well, which is pretty cool, because it's one of those things where I didn't expect him to do well, but I was wrong, and I'm glad that he did really well. One of the things that's really interesting is, as the heat goes on, like the trash talking between Wild Willie, Jet, and A-Nub, it starts to calm down. They start having to concentrate because Gab's just literally running away with it. And if they don't get, faster or better or try something, they're just going to lose outright in this particular event. And, none of them wants to do that. So it's very interesting to see, high energy trash talking at the very beginning to, all right, what do we need to do to actually stay competitive and make sure Gab doesn't run away with this particular event? So things weren't actually very interesting for the first first two heats, maybe three. On the third heat, things started getting interesting. It's because all of the other pilots started getting significantly more aggressive, and because they knew that Gab was going to run away with it if they stuck to the same strategy. And it's one of those things where it kind of played out really well on, in front of television. One of the things that happened was that, Gab started losing his big lead at the very beginning, and that's where he was doing his most work. Watching the video, he was definitely faster in the front half of the track and slower in the back half of the track. There were a lot of other pilots that was actually significantly faster. You can actually watch it on television, in which people can catch up to Gab in the back half, but he's able to hold him off on the last tunnel because he has such smooth lines going through. And he's still in the lead, so he gets to pick his own lines, and he's not encumbered by, the pressures of another person breathing down his neck. So, but it changed in that one because he got knocked around quite a bit, and then he lost his pole position, and he wasn't able to catch up. So he was still able to, continue to come in, third place and all that, to keep getting points, and that ultimately played out to why he won Miami Nights. But it was definitely a completely different shift when all the other pilots start stepping it up, and they really stepped it up big time. It was one of those things where, like, you thought you saw their best flying, but then when you see Wild Willie, Jet, A-Nub, when they started cutting corners significantly more aggressively, when they actually are being aggressive in the tightest spots on the track, that's when you see some really great racing. And that's what you saw from basically Heat 3 all the way on to the rest of the heats. I think one of the things that played out is the fact that Jet really didn't do very well in this particular event. He was pretty much knocked out of it by the third or fourth heat. There was actually zero chance that he can get into the first pole position. But like I said in the very beginning, that did not prevent him from racing really hard and finishing first and having the fastest lap time. I think in the fourth or fifth heat, I don't remember. Ultimately, though, 32 Bits actually had the fastest lap time coming in, which is pretty amazing, because he had a really, really fast run, which is pretty amazing. The part of the track that was the most interesting to watch was definitely what they called the helix. So that's the spiral going into the stadium again. There was just so much action there. There was so much catching up. You can tell that certain pilots, Gab, took it conservatively. He actually, he was one of the slower ones, if not the slowest one through that. While you see Wild Willie and Jet, they were really aggressive and coming through that, and it's one of those things where you're constantly, you're rolled and you're pitched and you're coming down. So it can be quite difficult in a tight space, but they were really aggressive. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. But it was really interesting to see how Gab's strategy of being consistent and finishing ultimately played out for him in order to win. But the other pilot's strategy of being aggressive at the back half of the track, had we had, two more heats, I'm not sure if Gab would have won, Miami Nights, because I feel like the other pilots caught on to a strategy or racing style that could ultimately beat out Gab's big points lead from the very beginning, because they were really, really pushing him and making him go out of his comfort zone in order to consistently place in the top three. So, like I said, it was really interesting racing. It actually got down to the last heat to determine who was going to win. So that's what you like to see. You want to be competitive in the last heat, and that's what it was. Ultimately, Gab didn't finish first in the last heat, but he had enough points. He had enough early lead to be able to win the event, and kudos to him for that. It was really fun watching them. I think all of the heats counted, which is really great. So, like, if you haven't watched the episode, you should totally go watch it. It was really entertaining. I like all of the spotlights. It was a lot of fun, and I thought they did an excellent job. Can't wait for the next episode. I believe it's New Orleans. No, Atlanta. Can't wait for the Atlanta one. I'll probably be back to do my particular take on that. Don't want this running too long, because I actually don't want to edit this thing any more than it needs to, and get this out. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and I'll catch you next time.